We're going to read and then later talk about the Lord of the Rings. So I think the first thing we need to figure out is at what pace do we read it?
This is a good question. Obviously, I think it needs to be dynamic. We'll have to speed up and slow down with the mood and the actions, but I'd like to go at a brisk pace.
So
where people, it's not a fast story. Anyone who's familiar with Lord of the Rings knows this. And slowing it down, I don't think will help people get engaged and feel the magic.
Mm-hmm. So, for instance, I think that the chapters, I can't remember how many there are, that deal with Tom Bombadil would have to be one episode. I think that's a good example of a point that you feel like, okay, we've been here for a while.
Yeah. And it's all, hey, ho, I'm Bombadillo. His jacket is blue and his boots are yellow or something like this.
Yeah. Wow, you remember his songs really well.
Yeah, I love it.
And I wonder how your perception of it will be different than mine. So you've read with your eyes the book several times. It's been a while since the last read. Before we sat down to start discussing this, I very briefly perused the prologue and the first chapter, and it was good for me to get an idea again, but I knew it all. I was like, yes. It jogged my memory, but it's all there in my head. Yeah. So I've never read it with my eyes. I've only listened to the audiobook.
Which sounds amazing. I actually really want to listen to what you just showed me. Maybe I'll download it from Internet Archive.
It's good. Lots of different voice actors. The song, but the things that I wonder how much you lose. I read The Hobbit when I was a kid, and there's a lot of songs in The Hobbit. Yes. And as a kid with no musical skill, I was like, okay, I'm reading weird poetry.
Totally. I used to skip them when I was younger. Now I regret that. And I love reading them, it's hard to get a feel though for how it should be interpreted or sang or read or anything like that. It is kind of hard, but I enjoy it much more now. When I was a kid, I definitely would go, another song, get me back to the action.
Yeah, exactly. But in the audiobooks, they sing the songs. So
intriguing.
Yeah, on one hand, it takes out a lot of work because you don't have to think like, okay, how does this actually fit together?
Yeah.
But then on the negative hand, it takes away all the possibilities of what the songs could have been before you heard it. And I feel like once you hear a melody to a set of words, it's very difficult to see the words again and not be stuck on the melody you were told.
Though for me, reading the lyrics, it was much more frequently, I wouldn't assign a constant melody. I wouldn't come up with a coherent song and a structure to those lyrics. I would sort of try it out, singing in Elvish. I mean, I don't recall any of the exact words, but like Tinuviel, Ethereal, Undying Lands. Like I didn't know how to do it, so I like the idea of listening to it, even though it does solidify the way you hear it in that one way.
I'm really surprised by your ability to remember such details.
Thank you. Thank you. And by the way, everyone, welcome to, we're going to come up with a really good podcast name and we're going to insert it right there.
The Flying Fools. I made a mistake of looking up other Lord of the Rings podcast names. Some of them are pretty good, like the One Podcast to Rule Them All. I don't know if any of these podcasts
you came
are
up
good.
with that, and
then immediately
I respect it, but it's cheesy.
Yeah, immediately
it's the low-hanging fruit.
A whole bunch of other people must have also come up with this.
Yes.
The Prancing Pony, The Men of the West.
The Men of the West.
Which, did you feel whenever he would bring up the West that it felt too analogous to the real West?
I've heard a lot of people bring this up, saying the time in which it was written and the way the story is constructed, that it's clearly a metaphor for the West and Western civilization, especially pitted against the East and communism in post-World War II times. It actually really, like, as we know, the story began in World War I, but this is the idea of West versus East, and Mordor and evil lies to the East. Tolkien repeatedly denied that and said, don't try to read into my stuff. This is what I created. Of course, I don't think anyone can be fully removed from their time.
Yeah.
But I think people love reading into things and finding meaning. And of course, there's a lot of meaning in Lord of the Rings. But in this particular case, I don't know if it was an active choice by him. Maybe, I mean, of course, he was influenced, but I don't know if it was a real active choice about the West and the East. What do you think?
It just seems too coincidental.
Okay.
You know what? Like, I really wanted, because like I also saw, I guess it wasn't a real interview. It's just a quote of him saying like, I don't do analogies. It's fiction. It's supposed to be fiction. But then I guess it would make sense that a fictitious world would also have similar divides to what we see.
But The Lord of the Rings was our first large-scale introduction to this amazing world that Tolkien created. And if we go back before the Third Age, in which The Lord of the Rings is set, it wasn't East versus West. The evil was in the North. You do always have, it's true, like the Undying Lands and the origins, I guess, of life really in the West as far as it pertains to like a real and tangible world. But there were times when it wasn't really East versus West, like Sauron and his fortress in the north, Gundabad or something like that, was set north of Mordor. These divides changed over time to get to East against West.
Yeah, but then there are some things that you say like, okay, look, it doesn't matter how fictitious something is. When you read it nowadays, it comes off as a bit too spicy. For instance, spoilers for those who don't know the big guys. Overarching story, Sam and Frodo do eventually get back to the Shire. And Sam, in big broad strokes, Sam plants trees with some magical soil, and the whole Shire becomes extra healthy. And it says that then the children are, I think, bigger and blonder. And I'm like,
I don't remember that, but they say like more fair hair.
Yeah, and they're like, and the children are born with fair hair, which was rare, but now became common. And that,
makes you question like what's the underlying thought process?
I don't know where I'm going.
No, it is an interesting point though.
But that's something that like I feel like I can't divorce that from just the world we live in, the
modernity
world he lived in.
And yeah. I have no idea how to interpret that. We'll have to.
That's the end of the third book. So
guys, remind us. We need to come back to that point. That's really interesting. I didn't remember that. So that's maybe one thing about reading versus listening. That's a really good point that I just didn't recall. I remember the description of the Shire really being beautiful and bountiful. He has, I think, the Malahorn tree. He had like a seed of that from Lothlorien, and he planted it in the Shire, and with that special soil. But the blonde or more fair hair part, I didn't remember. It's like I really love the movie Ben-Hur, I think 1960s classic Charlton Heston. I think it's tied for the most Oscars of all time, actually with. Would you guess, guys? Lord of the Rings. But in the film, there's a character in blackface. And I don't know, I watched it a few years ago, and I just didn't remember at all. I was like, wait, what?
Yeah.
And I wonder if I had selectively tried to forget that, or when I was young, I just thought, he looks unusual. He doesn't look like a typical black or dark-skinned man. I don't know, but I watched it again, and I still love the film, but I can't unsee now. Like, wow, that guy's in blackface.
Yeah, and also sometimes the evil characters are described as black.
The orcs and Uruk-hai.
And
the men of the South, actually.
The men of the South Haradrim. And the people who tried to go to the Undying Lands and were punished by the gods, by the... What's the name of the lower tier?
Numenorians.
The black, yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
and
it's true.
Like, with the orcs, with the Nazgul being called the Black Riders, I think with like black Numenorians and black riders, that's different because black has a very clear connotation of night, of dark, and that for a lot of human history has been something associated with light versus dark. I don't think that has to do with issues of skin color, but when you talk about like dark skinned people, that's when I think, okay, this makes me cringe and worry about what
the intention or the framework behind this was.
Yeah. Okay. A pretty sharp turn from how related the story is to the world we live in. A very common critique I hear of the overarching plot of Lord of the Rings that I think is complete fucking bananas is when people say, well, why couldn't the Eagles just take the ring to Mount Doom? Which I feel like somebody needs to say that that's so dumb. Like, Gandalf clearly pointed out that if you gave the ring to a being with any power or any ambition of power, they would pull a 180, basically, and that only hobbits in their childishness and their lack of ambition could hold it and not be too tempted, which we saw at the end. Even Frodo was too tempted and was not going to throw it into the mountain.
Yeah, and that's actually a really insightful point that you've made. I like when people say stuff like that. It's kind of frustrating, and it's like, all right, well, you have to take a second and think, all right, how can we plausibly deny this? Clearly, like, guys, don't be silly. Like, oh, what if you just created a black hole and jumped through space? It's like you're breaking, it's like, I don't know, what is it, Deus Ex Machina? You're breaking the story to make it easier. But yeah, exactly. Powerful beings like Gandalf, like more powerful men and elves and dwarves, and the eagles, of which are a very prideful and powerful race or species. They are corrupted, and they take it because they always assume they can use it for good. We see this in the books. So yeah, like, obviously there's a kind of almost simplicity, like a very straight up. Yeah, like it's how am I forgetting? Not a contradiction, but it's a paradox sort of. You give the most powerful object to the least powerful people.
Juxtaposition,
maybe. Is it juxtaposition?
I think so. Maybe. I didn't know what juxtaposition meant until somebody said it's playing Grand Theft Auto in a church.
Yeah.
I don't know how accurate that is.
Juxtaposition, I don't think that's the right word. Juxtaposition is a very sharp comparison with a lot of contrast. So maybe that is right. I think paradox in a way is like it doesn't make sense, but it does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But also, on a more technical note, the Eagles could not have made it into Mordor whenever Mordor was an active fortress. They only managed to fly over after Sauron had been defeated.
Also true.
And there were no defenses. Like, okay.
Yeah, like you see the Eagles fly over, and you do something about it. It's not like these Eagles can fly up into the stratosphere, you know? Yeah, it's another fair point. But I think the better one is what you said before about the power of the ring and the difficulty they have. Like in the first book, The Fellowship, or rather the first part of the one book, they propose the idea, let's use it against him. We are excellent, powerful, and wise people. Let's flip the script, use his own powerful weapon against him, and it'll be a nice, happy ending. And then they say, wait.
It doesn't work like that.
It doesn't work like that.
Yeah. I have a very important question, though.
Ooh, okay.
Do you want to get another beer?
Let's get another beer.
Okay,
sure. Good hobbits, I think actually in the prologue, guys, they describe hobbits as being very fond of food and drink. So we're really just trying to emulate our hobbit friends, the Falahides, the Harfoots, and the Stores, I believe, are the three main tribes.
That's what I mean. That's the memory that...
This is because I just recently, just so you guys know, I'm not flexing. I just had to review all of the prologue, and so I went over this, and it was very helpful, I admit. But I feel we should probably introduce ourselves. Hello, everybody. My name is Grady. Grady Gillette, that is.
This is the first time I've heard you say your last name out loud.
Gillette.
And
Grady Gillette.
And I've always been worried, like, do I just pronounce it like the razor brand, or do I say Gillette?
Ah, wow. We're really opening up to each other here. Yeah. Like the razor. That's how, when I tell people, I say Gillette, like the razor, but without the E at the end.
Whenever I tell people, my name is Danny Tadmore. Whenever I tell people my name, I say like a bit more, but without the E at the end.
Ah, wow. Such connections here. We really never would have found this out about ourselves if it had not been.
Don't have E's at the end of our names.
Tad more. Just a tad more. The people just want a tad more of your voice.
See, my first language that I learned is Hebrew, and I learned English at a very young age, but I remember some key aspects of learning English. And one of the things that I remember is learning that tad and more are words, and that it's a phrase that people say, a tad more. And I'd go, I'm probably going to hear this for the rest of my life. And then I hardly ever heard it. And
the phrase, a tad more?
Yeah, people would be like, a tad more. I expected like this to be the bully shtick. Instead, it was tadpole. Like a baby frog.
That's exactly what I thought.
Really?
Yep, that's exactly. I thought when you started describing your name to everyone, I thought you were going to say tadpole, but just more. Because I don't know, I hear tad, and yes, it means a bit, small amount, but my first thought just jumped, tadpole.
Mm-hmm. Anyways,
tell the people about what we do.
We're both students. You can tell by our accent that we're both American in Tel Aviv University, but the things that we study are really different. I think like it gives us a different perspective, and I think the intersection of it is pretty refreshing.
Agreed. I am doing my master's degree in archaeology, particularly in this kind of subfield called petrography. So sort of a hard science, but with the idea of learning about past peoples, and most of my classes, are talking about past peoples through the material they left behind, history. It's really interesting, and it's like a very interdisciplinary field, but the interdisciplinary part does not intersect much with what you do, Danny.
So I'm doing my undergrad in electrical engineering, of which I don't have a very hard direction yet, but electrical engineering is largely split into 3 main branches, I would say. Okay, so there's the Cody computer side, there's the chip design side, and there's the electromagnetic fields wave side, and I gravitate more towards the last one.
And everyone, you really want to get the chance to hear him explain it. It's fun. It's engaging. There's lots of drawing. There's lots of exciting words that you don't understand. There's Fourier transform. Everything you could ever want for.
Thanks.
Okay. But let's get into this. As I was reviewing chapter 1, something stuck out to me. Tolkien is really writing an epic here, and he created a very detailed universe. He has scaled and highly accurate maps. He really created pretty functional languages, but there's not so much descriptive language in these books. If you look at it, I love the way Tolkien chooses words, but let's find an excerpt here. We meet the gaffer, Samwise Gamgee's dad. No one had a more attentive audience than old Ham Gamgee, commonly known as the gaffer. He held forth at the Ivy Bush, a small inn on Bywater Road, and he spoke with some authority, for he had tended the garden at Bag End for 40 years. And continues on. The gaffer himself was growing old and stiff in the joints. Mm-hmm. The job was mainly carried on by his youngest son, Sam Gamgee. So you have this description, and I feel in a lot of fantasy books, authors lay it on heavy with the description. He was growing old in the joints. Yeah. His hair was as white as a rabbit's tail, and every time he walked up the stairs, you would hear a like cacophony of pops from all of his joints. Like, you really try to use that language, and I don't think Tolkien does that much. Yeah. What do you think about this? Did you ever notice the same thing?
I did, kind of. So I've been interested in writing since a very young age, but not very good at it. And as a kid, I really wanted to write fantasy, but you run into this issue of like, how do I show people this very alien thing that I don't want to bore you and be like, well, his skin was blue and his eyes were green and he floated over. You don't want to waste people's time like this.
Yeah.
And
yeah, sure.
Tolkien knows very well how to hit the sweet spot of like, look, these are basically humans. They're human enough, and everybody knows the feeling of being a kid and seeing your friend's dad that you just want to hear him tell a fucking story. You're like,
totally,
dude, just like,
totally.
And then only years later, you're like, okay, those stories might have been a bit bullshit, but he knows the vibe that he's going for.
Yes, totally agreed. And there are times when you do have some nice description, but it's not the point. And I think in one way it's actually, we're seeing maybe the influence of when this was written. This was 60, 70 years ago, these books were published, and you don't quite see an emphasis on describing appearance or landscape or even sounds and tastes. You have like carefully chosen words, and then things move on. Like time is often, you have years or months go by and it's just one word. You just move on.
Yeah.
And in some fiction, I'm very familiar with that, but in fantasy, I feel it's a bit different, and it's an interesting choice by him. Yeah. Like, it leaves quite a bit to the imagination.
Really, his choice on how close he makes, like, the name of the world being Middle Earth tells us this is not entirely alien, and that you are expected to bring a lot of your... This feels kind of contrary to what we were saying earlier about him saying it's not an analogy, when Middle Earth, to me, really says, like, no, like, whenever they say a potato, it's a potato.
Yes.
Which, fun fact, that the story clearly happened after the equivalent of some kind of Columbian exchange. Like,
because of the potato?
The potatoes. There are potatoes in the Shire, and I think the layout of the Shire, this might be my bias of having recently seen Europe for the first time, and the way the Shire is depicted in the movies feels like Europe.
It's the English countryside.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's the inspiration in my view.
Yeah.
Okay.
So they had the Columbian exchange. They had a little Hobbit Columbus.
In my view, that's like a really interesting point that I never would have thought of. But
I don't
if that thought ever crossed his mind.
Yeah.
And it, at a certain point, it doesn't matter maybe if it crossed Tolkien's mind, but this is now a part of the popular culture and of many people's lives and childhoods and adulthood. So how do we interpret it is just as important maybe as how the author intended it. But
it's true.
I don't know. I've just never ever thought about like a Columbian exchange of sorts, because it is very clearly, I hear what you're saying. It is a modern, it's meant to be related to the modern world. If you read the prologue, there are many relations to how the hobbits are still around today. You just don't see them because they're a little bit more shy around the big people, in quotations, being humans. And I think I don't quite remember. I think what's implied is that we're still living in Middle Earth, but in the 6th or the 7th age.
Can I tell you one of my biggest fears? I think it might be one of those hobbits.
Now that I'm looking at you, you're not wearing any shoes.
I'm not.
You are rather hairy.
I'm by all standards rather hairy.
I
am a fan of food and drink.
You are a fan of food and drink. Okay. Things are coming together rather quickly.
Damn.
However, the height, you would be a very impressive hobbit in terms of stature. I think they describe one of Frodo's like great grandparents, the bull roar, something. One of the Tooks was over 4 feet, and that was amazing. He's over 4 feet tall. So I think you would be.
How convenient for us that it's measured in feet.
Yeah, thank you. Shout out Tolkien. I really appreciate your help in that regard.
I feel like the main fantasy of Lord of the Rings is man's relationship with nature. The idea that you have different types of people and you have humanoids that aren't human are like, it's definitely fantastical. But the idea that really sells it, the vibe that you get, like, everything was peaceful until Sauron came and fucked everything up, is that the kingdoms and the Shire seem to be in balance with nature. You never hear about how the Shire has to chop down the forest next door to heat their holes in the winter.
Sure.
And I feel like the first few chapters really sets this up, that they live with enough, but it seems to be in balance.
It's a really interesting point, and I think it very well could be. Like, you see it throughout the entire book. It's really well represented, and you can get deep with the analysis to how people are interacting with nature, how the hobbits are really fond of farming, but they don't over extract. They're not a mercantile people trading a lot. They produce their food, they live, and they're very happy to live. They don't create these big cities. They don't conduct experiments and that require a lot of, resources. But I'm going to be honest, I don't have any profound thoughts like you do about the fundamental fantasy of Lord of the Rings. I think that's a beautiful one that you've proposed. I don't have anything on the top of my head. The incredibly cheesy response I would give is, I think it's just a very well-made, well-structured, and just beautifully done, like, very classic old story of a good guy and a bad guy. And it's more complicated than that because you have so many characters. You have side plots and secondary characters and a beautiful universe created. But you have an order. Yeah. You have an order of things, and you have an evil force. So I need to think more on what I believe the fundamental fantasy to be. But I think, like, the kind of cop-out of just it's good versus evil told in one of the best ways in history.
So I think the good versus evil is clear. It's, of course, most stories are a cut and dry good versus evil. But I think if you had to boil it down to who is the good and who is the evil, the good is Gandalf. He is the protagonist in the sense that he is the one who gets the gears rolling. He's the one who tells Frodo, you got to get off your ass and you got to go to a place you really don't want to go for the sake of everything. And Sauron is, of course, the bad guy, but I think that the hobbits and the elves, the way I interpreted it, are a symbol of childhood. And especially the four main hobbits
absolutely agree with that. I absolutely agree with
they go through the gentle trauma of waking up, growing up, and in a sense also waking up and understanding the reality of the world, and coming back to the Shire and realizing they can't stay in the childhood that the Shire is. And
I think you're onto something here, and I would latch on to this perhaps more than what you're saying about the like man versus nature or like machinery and exploitation, because it really the what is the like fancy word that we learned in English class, Bildungsroman, like a coming of age story.
I did not go to that fancy of a school.
Okay, fair enough. But like where you have this idyllic scene painted in the Shire. You have friends, you have Bilbo, who somehow seemingly magically doesn't grow old, good food and drink, living a simple life. It's like a fairy tale. And then, shit happens. As we all know, in the real world, shit happens. And so many things change. In the end, there's a return, and you realize, as Frodo says, there's no going back. And so I think you could really be onto something here about how a theme of tackling change, but yet preserving what is good and true, like moving from a ideal of black and white to a viewpoint that accepts shades of gray but doesn't give up that there is a sense of right and wrong, like a good and evil, as I said.
Yeah. There's two more analogies that to me are very strong in this book that I want to point out, that the elves are in a way also children, but they're much more aware of the world, but in much the same way that it's difficult to explain to a child, like, yes, doing something makes me happy, but I can't do it all the time. We can't eat candy all the time. They go, But why though? And the elves are permanently in the situation of like, but why can't you just chill and sing songs all day? Is that not what you want? Do you not like drinking wine and singing songs? Shit's fucking dope. And the humans are like, yeah, but we gotta do other shit.
Well, in this point, maybe we're refining what we're talking about, the theme or the main fantasy, because elves are immortal. So their youth does not end in a way.
True.
They get more knowledgeable. They become better fighters, better singers, better magicians, I suppose.
Dude, elf bands must have been fucking fire.
Wild, man. Imagine how long you have to perfect your craft. But you don't have the fear of death. And the hobbits and humans have that. Dwarves, it's said, are very long-lived.
Yeah.
But humans and hobbits, you have that fear of death. Therefore, all of your perspective changes. You only have, 80 years, maybe more, 100 years on this earth. And it really changes how you interpret and engage with the world. So maybe we need to incorporate that fact into what Tolkien's main message was about, I don't know, like preserving a sense of youth and childhood, and saying it's not the hobbits or the elves or the humans or the dwarves who are the inheritors of the earth, but everyone has a season and a place. In the first and maybe second age, the elves were maybe getting the limelight. And then the third age is coming the time of men. But hobbits are now playing their part.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't know, maybe I'll have to think on that. I feel like that's a good thread to pull.
I think a very common theme, and one that people often talk about when analyzing Lord of the Rings, is that of addiction. And that Gollum
Totally.
and is completely a symbol of addiction in what I think is one of the most accurate and painful portrayals of it, that he is truly addicted, that he cannot win. If you could win, you would have won the addiction. Nobody wants to be addicted. Doesn't mean it still doesn't feel good to do whatever you're addicted to, but once you realize, okay, I know how to win, I will climb out of this hole, then you have won. But Gollum, being the symbol of addiction, does not win. And I think that a big part of growing up that everybody faces with, this is just part of the experience of becoming an adult, is you realize addiction is real and that we are all susceptible to it. I think nowadays even more so, because there are many more addictive activities that are available to kids nowadays than was available in Tolkien's time, where I'd have to imagine they were largely physical stimulants like then. But
yeah, and the ease of access, like there are very low barriers to entry to addictive activities or substances. That's another really interesting point that I have often thought about with the Lord of the Rings, because you can take it, Gollum is a perfect example, as you said, but then I think if we do a little thought experiment and apply it to Saruman, it's a really good way to do it as well, who in his quest for knowledge and power, he wants to know more and know more, and he's sort of almost in like a biblical tree of life, and eating this apple will give you knowledge. He keeps on pushing the boundaries and pushing the boundaries, and he can't stop, and he arrives at Sauron, and he falls under the spell and the maybe addiction of Saruman and the promise of power. And it doesn't end so well for him. Yeah. But in both the film and the book, Saruman tries to tell Gandalf, look, I've figured it out. Like,
this shit's fucking dope, man.
Yeah, like it's dope. Like I'm doing the same thing I've always done. I'm pursuing knowledge and power, and this is where it's led me. Come join me, man. And Gandalf's like, man, what are you saying? You're an addict. Like, I won't support you in this type of behavior. So I think the addict metaphor really applies there as well.
And I think the addict metaphor extends to the very end, which answers why could Frodo not stay in the Shire? Because he, more than all the other characters, now knows what addiction is. And the rest of the people in the Shire are not aware that this burden exists. And even though he's not cured, he didn't have this arc, and I think it's not meant to be a thing that you can get over, in a sense, because we don't know of a single character who held the ring, was like, yeah, and then was like, actually, I'm going to give it up. Everybody either dies or the ring gets destroyed.
You're right. I mean, Sam does give it up after getting the ring there
you're
for a
right.
few days.
Oh, I am
incorrect.
However,
but you are right in the sense that Frodo has to leave. He goes to the Undying Lands, and if you read the appendices, Sam eventually goes to join him. He lives like a long and fruitful life, but in the end,
Sam also knows
he leaves because he was a ring bearer for a few days. So I think you're onto something nonetheless. I wonder though. I really am liking this addiction metaphor and how it really. It's not like it applies. It feels like it's embedded in the story.
Yeah.
It's not something like a way in which we're trying to view the story. It feels like you're absolutely right. I mean, clearly we see it with Boromir. That's sort of like that's a low-hanging fruit. But I wonder, I don't know, Aragorn is sort of supposed to be this solemn, really wise, and I guess even sympathetic character. And he's sort of, in a lot of parts of the story, it feels like he has no flaws. Is there any addiction that he is maybe not succumbing to, but struggling with, dealing with, having to address? I don't know.
How PG are we trying to make this? Aragorn's trying to get elf pussy the entire book. Dude has no chill. That is his main arc. That is all he wants. He knows that elves don't want no dude that ain't a fucking king. So he's got to get to be a fucking king to serve this one goal.
Oh, you're cracking me up. Wait, but do you believe this? Is this, or are you sort of...
Yeah, are you kidding me? They're like, do we go this way or do we go through the elf way? He's like, we're going the elf way. And they're like, is this the best? It's the best way. And are you sure?
Wait.
Sure.
In what part of the story?
In the first one, he goes and he's like, oh, gosh, this shows that I've only listened to this once, and Grady's much more...
No, are you talking about going the path of Rivendell in the first? Or...
Oh, no. There's one afterwards with a lake in the water, a lady... God, fuck, no. Only the hobbits went. He wasn't there. He was off doing some other stuff.
I mean, he is in love with an elf. And, I mean, a part of that love is very physical. He's going to have little babies and have sex with this beautiful elf. He's going to enjoy it. Hopefully she will enjoy it as well. But I don't know if that's like addiction. I think you're really stretching it there.
Okay, fair. I think beyond this, I'll admit it's a stretch. He's basically a Jesus character. He's basically the one who comes in and says like, hey, I will do what's right. I will sacrifice myself for what's right for the sake of the world.
Does he sacrifice himself?
He does not. It doesn't come to that, but I think it's shown pretty clearly that if it would come to that, he would not hesitate. If he would have died in the Battle of Mordor at the very end, he would have been like, cool, I did what I had to do.
Yeah. Okay. We don't need to overcomplicate things. The ring is addictive, and everyone who comes into contact with it can't, in the end, whether it takes minutes or decades, they can't stand up to its attraction. And that is a repeated theme. So I think in the end, your addiction comment is beautiful.
Yeah, that's okay. But also for Aragorn, it the addiction analogy wouldn't extend to him because he never touches the ring.
True. Does Boromir ever touch the ring?
No,
because he's drunk on the potential of its power.
Yeah.
And I suppose we'd have to get creative in some senses to apply this, but I think it does work. Like, the ring wraiths are all
crackheads.
They were people who were turned by the promise of power.
Yeah.
Is that what a crackhead? I'll be unstoppable on this crack cocaine.
The line that stood out to me the most in the whole trilogy was whenever Gollum talks to Sam. Whenever Frodo goes into the mountain, Sam holds Gollum at knife point, sword point, and tells Frodo, go into the mountain, not knowing that Frodo won't be able to do it. And Gollum tells Sam, please, we're lost. Mm-hmm. And that's the last thing he says, excluding my precious, before he dies. And I think that is the perfect analogy for an addict. Whenever you're in the middle of it, you're lost. And in that moment, he has a moment of clarity, and he pleads with Sam, like, I don't know what to do without this.
Yeah, and it's just, he's being honest. He's not saying, like, look, I'll never do it again. He says, I'm lost.
Yeah.
Which I actually do not remember, but the way you just said that was really profound, and I look forward to rereading it and coming across that last exchange. But he is, I mean, he's very lost, and I think Gollum is by far the best and the most deeply explored example of this theme of addiction. And in the end, I don't know, would you say that, can we arrive at a conclusion that Gollum won or Gollum lost? Because I think we can take this for a while and say Gollum's actions led to a very desirable outcome. He, in the end, was just succumbing to his addiction once again, as he had time and time again. He had, for times, successfully fought it, and then always ended up falling back into that same hole. But in the end, he falls into a hole that destroys the ring forever. Not his intent, but he played a pivotal role. So, like, how do we incorporate that into the idea, like, did he win or lose?
I think that the character represents how you can have contradictory wants.
Yeah.
And in him, Tolkien had a big piece of wisdom to give his contradictory parts different names. So I think Gollum won. Gollum did what he came out to do.
Yeah.
He was like, fuck it, I will get the ring no matter what it takes. And he got the ring. And what it took is him dying, but he got the ring. Smeagol lost. Thank you very much. I'm Danny Tadmore.
And I'm Grady Gillette.
And the next episode, we're going to read the first 3 chapters, the ones that take place inside of the Shire before they go on their journey.
Or rather, we will have read the first 3 chapters. We will
discuss
excerpts.
the 3 chapters. Yes.
We're going to have a great time, guys. An unbelievably great time.